Hello and welcome to Ambient 3D Animations. Today we're going to be 3D modeling a beginner project. We're going to be 3D modeling a hairbrush. And yes, we're going to get into simulating hair and how to do that inside of Cinema 4D and using Redshift. So if you're interested in that, let's go ahead and jump into Cinema 4D and get started. I like to turn on my garage shading lines, display mode, and just so that we get a sense of scale, I'm going to hold a click on this cube button here to get all our primitives, and I'll let go of my click on this figure so that we get a standard sized person in here so that we can help imagine what size this hairbrush needs to be. Okay, so now that we have this guy in place, we're going to imagine what if he was holding a hairbrush, and I'm going to go ahead and drop a plane in here, because we're going to start 3D modeling this from a plane. So once again, I'm holding a click here, letting go of it on the plane. And very briefly, in case if you're completely new to Cinema 4D, I'm going to go through some of the move commands. So if you hold Alt, left click, and drag your mouse, you'll see that we are pivoting around our person in here, our figurine. If you middle click scroll, you can zoom in and out. If you click on your middle mouse button and press Alt, you can move. You can also use the 1, 2, 3 keys to navigate. So 1 and click is panning, so we're moving around. 2 and left click is zooming in, zooming out. 3 and left click is pivoting around. So do as you like, find the system that works best for you. I like to use the Alt keys, but you are not limited by that. So now our plane here, we have these options show up for it in our attributes manager. You'll see we have our width and height, so we can choose the basic size of this. So let's make this a little bit smaller. Right now we're working on the part of the hairbrush that has this, that holds the bristles, we'll call them. We're going to be working on that in here, so I'm going to adjust the height. Move this whole plane up so that I can have it close to his hand to imagine what if he were to hold a hairbrush and brush his hair. This figure here. And about how big should that be? And you can make your hairbrush really whatever size suits you. So now this part that comes into play is we are going to make this plane a little bit more of an oval shape. So what I want you to really think about now is we're going to have these little groups of bristles. You'll see here on the hairbrush. If you look really up close to a hairbrush, these bristles actually come up in little groupings, little circular groupings. It's not the same throughout. So what I want to do is I want to clone a bristle grouping along the points in our plane. So that's what we're doing here. So we need to go back into Cinema 4D and take a look at this. Now imagine all of these points. Once we make this oval shaped, we'll have a little grouping cloned on it with bristles. So that's what we want to keep in mind as we're working here. So keeping that in mind, how many do we want? We can adjust that with our width and height segments. So I feel like we need some more height segments in here, just because this brush is elongated. And once we have all of that done, we can make this editable in 2 ways. When we have our plane clicked on, we can click this button down here, which will make this editable. And that will allow you to click on the points, edges, and polygons in here. You'll see that the hotkey for this is also C. So if you want to start practicing your hotkeys to get quicker at modeling, you can do that as well. So I'll go ahead and click that button there. Now we have our lovely plane. How are we going to turn this into an oval? Well, let's go ahead and switch from model mode into polygon mode, since now we can do that now that this is editable. And you can see I can click on polygons here. but we want to click on all of them. So we're going to use a hotkey UF for fill selection. And then if you click on this in here, it'll just select all of them. So that's very useful. And once we have these all selected, we have this option down here called Fit Circle. Now I know a circle is not an oval, but it's a good starting point for an oval. So we're going to click on this, and you'll see we have options appear in here. Let's click and drag in our viewport, and you'll begin to see a circle form. Now we're going to make a few changes in here. First of all, we'd like to adjust the inner points. So we'll select that. Now you can see it's more evenly distributed throughout. The next thing that I want to do is select outline, and that will allow us to also edit the outline or save it as a selection, which will be useful later on. So now we have the base of our hairbrush. You can also adjust the angle to where you see is fit. So that's kind of like the rotation of the circle itself. And I'll actually do that from this top view. So you can switch views by using the middle mouse button. You'll see you have these quadrants: perspective, top view, right view, front view. So I click the middle mouse button to come into here. I hit the middle mouse button again to come into here. And now it'll just be easier for me to adjust this like so. Get this a little bit straighter. It doesn't have to be perfect. So I'm going to keep it there. That looks good. Clicking the middle mouse button again to go back into our perspective view. So now we can go ahead and make some adjustments to this, but first we're going to save our edge selection. So we have select outline on. Now if we do that and shift over to our edges, you'll see we have our edges selected here. I'd like to go up into select, store selection, and you'll see we get this tag over here. And if I ever click away and lose my selection, if I double click on this tag, it will reselect it for me. So that will come in really useful while 3D modeling later on. So I just want to store that in there. And that's why we had chosen select outline earlier, thinking ahead of what our next 3D modeling process will be. Now, let's go ahead and work with the polygons again. We are going to need to scale this in so it's a little bit more of an oval. So we do that using the T hotkey. You'll also see the scale is over here with the hotkey listed when you hover over it. And you'll see that our axis changed how it looks. We have these little controls now, and we can scale in various options. Right now we want to scale in the X direction, so I'm going to pull this in here. You can even hold Shift to snap to increments, and that can be controlled that way. So maybe I'll snap to about 50%, and that's the beginnings of our hairbrush. Now I want to deselect these outer edges, so I'm going to hold Control and deselect around here. Because now I want to be able to move this up ever so slightly. I can use UL to select loop selection, and you can also deselect loops as a group holding Control and hovering over them and clicking. So I can go ahead and do this. And now I can use E to just move this up a little bit. So you can see that we're slowly increasing this. And I could have done this using something called a soft selection, but it would have been more challenging to have it be even in the way that I'd like. So I'm just doing this way, even though it may take more time. It may appear it actually takes less time because it's more accurate and I don't have to do all these little small adjustments just to get it looking right. So I do prefer this way. And then I think finally I'm going to go into edge mode here so that I can select these little edges. And I'm just going to individually move these up so that we get that nice dome shape. Here at the top, I'll deselect holding Control click. That'd be Command on a Mac, by the way, if you're wondering. So something kind of subtle like that, and you can even go in here and smooth it out a little bit with the iron. One thing that I would say when doing that, UF, just to select all of these in here. One thing that I would say when smoothing this out is I don't really want to adjust this outer edge because right now it's perfectly level. So if I go into the right view and zoom in here, you can see this is perfectly level here. So I actually don't want to be adjusting that outer edge. So if you're going to use the iron, we probably want to make sure we're not selecting that outer edge. So there's a few different ways we could do that. We do have our stored selection. So if we go into edge mode, have our stored selection, then we can go into select with our stored selection selected and select invert. And now you'll see we have everything else selected inside. So now when we go in here to use the iron tool, which the hotkey for it is MG, you'll see that we're smoothing it out some by clicking and dragging, but we're not selecting that outer edge, and that's very, very useful. But it does seem to be moving a little bit, so I'm actually going to hit undo a few times. And then if you want to hit redo, it's Control Y. And there's one other step that I want to do. So I actually want to deselect these outer edges because they're still pulling that exterior edge because they're pretty connected. So let's try that again with these deselected. So here you're getting to see me do a little bit of troubleshooting. And I feel like that's important because then you can do it on your own as you get used to 3D modeling, because there's a lot of troubleshooting involved here. Now we can use the iron tool again, click and drag. You can see how that just looks smoother. And we can even move this up a little bit to increase the height on that dome on our brush. So this is looking good. At this point, I want to store this as a selection, everything selected, all these polygons in polygon mode. So we can go into our select menu, choose store selection, and this time you'll see we get another triangle, but this triangle is filled in, signifying that these are polygons instead of edges. So I think that the icons here are pretty clever, that edges are made up of lines and polygons are this filled in triangle. So right now I'm going to hit save. So inside of here, I'm going to name this brush and then hit save. Remember to save your work as you go. And so that's the base of it. Now let's go ahead and talk about making the bristles. So I'm going to add in a disc in here. And you'll see that the disc automatically drops on our origin in our scene. I'm going to put it underneath the plane. Hit this button here and choose Reset Transform. And that will just move it directly to the center of where our brush is. And then I'll take it out from the hierarchy of the plane. So when I did that, I was grabbing the coordinates of the plane by placing this within the hierarchy of the plane. Hitting Reset Transform sets all of those values back to 0. And then when I drag this out, it's perfectly centered. So we kind of have all our working pieces nicely together. Now we're going to decrease the outer radius of our disk object. And all these settings appear when you have them selected And when you have the object selected, they appear in your Attributes Manager. Okay, so we need bristles coming out of the circle, and even more than that, we need to clone it. So let's go ahead and add in our cloner in here. So I'm going to drop a cloner into our scene. We're going to put the disk inside the cloner. And we want the cloner's mode to be object, because that will allow us to clone this disk along an object. And we want that object to be this dome part of our brush. Now the cloner, we want this to distribute along the vertex or the polygon center even. So you can choose between vertex or polygon center. I may use the polygon center because that keeps everything within the brush a little bit more. I'm going to turn off this. You'll see that we have this align clone selected, and we're running into an issue where the clones are facing the wrong direction. So I'm actually going to make this clone a little bit smaller, and then we're going to adjust its direction. So I'm going to make this something like, or you can also hold Alt and click and drag, and you can kind of adjust this further in here. Maybe 0.17. There we go. So that seems like a better size to me. I'm going to click on my cloner in here, and under the transform, you can see that you can actually rotate your clone. So we need these to be facing upwards. So we need to figure out that 90 degrees seems to be the sweet point for that. And now we need this disk to have bristles coming out of it. So I'm actually going to turn off the cloner for a second so that we can just really focus in on this disk. Under your Simulate menu, you'll see we have this menu down here called Hair. Our hair objects include Add Hair. Now, despite this name, you can use it for many things. You can use it for bristles. You can use it for what we're doing here, a hairbrush. I've used this tool to make grass. You can make all kinds of things with it. And yes, you can also make hair and put that on a character that you've modeled. Let's go ahead and add some hair in here. And you'll see right there that is cloning. I'm going to go ahead and drop the disk object, or the hair object inside of the disk, excuse me. And you can kind of see how this is looking by dropping in a Redshift sun and sky object. I'll reduce this a little bit, its intensity, and I'll hit start IPR. So I'm just dropping in a light in here so that when we hit Redshift start IPR, we can see a preview of our render. So you can see we have a few problems here. First of all, this hair is way too long. Second of all, it's way too thick. So let's take a look at this. Within our hair, we can do a few things. We can reduce the count. So let's reduce that to like 17. And since this doesn't need to animate, and it's going to be straight up and down, for the number of segments along the hair, we only really need one, and that'll save us some memory. What you're seeing right here on your screen, this isn't actually hair. These are the guides that are signifying the direction of the hair. So you can imagine that one guide and how it moves or bends could be controlling multiple hairs, 3, 4, 5, 6, however many. So your guides are not the same number as your hair. They're just controlling the direction of the hair. So right now, you can see that our guides also have segments. I'm going to reduce the number of segments to 1 again, because you only need segments if the hairs are going to bend, which we don't need. And we don't need a ton of guides, so I can even decrease this to 1. And this one guide can be guiding all the hairs we have in here. So that's the first part. The second part is our guides can also help control the length. And right now, we don't need anything that long. So let's go ahead and reduce this to something more manageable. Let's try 0.6. So now you can see that's our length. I'm going to hit File, Save again, just in case. And I'll hit Start IPR and we'll see a preview. So we're getting closer, but you can see that these hairs are a little bit on the thicker side. So we'll need to adjust that. I'm going to double click on this icon here. And once you do that, you'll see this tab called Thickness. You can adjust your thickness in here. Right now we have the root as 1 centimeter. That's way too much. Let's try 0.05. And you'll see that updates. Now our tip is at 0.1. Let's try 0.05 and just see how that looks. So these are starting to look a little bit more like hairs. You can see that we need to make this way smaller. Let's try 0.01 and 0.01. Okay, so this looks a little bit more like bristles, what we're getting here, which is the ultimate goal. Now what we're going to need to do is, now that we've done that, we need actually more hairs, I feel like. So let's click on our hair generator again to open up these sets of tools. We're going to increase the number of hairs we have. So right now we have like 17-ish. Let's try 20. Can just increase this until we get to a number we like. And then you can also further adjust this. I'm going to click on this in here. So if you hit on the basic tab, you'll see that you have these different options. You can make it wavy, curly, and so on and so forth. You can adjust the density, you can tighten it, you can bend it, twist it, straighten it. So right now I want to affect the clump, so I'm going to select clump, and when I do that, I get this new tab. And we also have this clumping graph here. So this is affecting the amount of clumping from the base to the top of this. So if I decrease this, we'll have less clumping at the top, but I can clump this more at the bottom. And I can select Include Roots to also affect the roots. I'm going to refresh this. And I'm going to increase the strength of the clump. Let's try 50%. And I'm adjusting that shape. So you can see that this looks a little bit more like how something would in a hairbrush. I'm going to put this within the cloner object and turn it on. You'll see that the bristles are going the wrong way, so we'll need to rotate these within the transform of our cloner. You can see that right now we have this turned 90 degrees. We need to turn this 180 degrees, so that would be negative 90 degrees. And you'll see we're rotating this around. But you won't see any updates until you go within your hair object under your guides tab and click update guides. And then you can see that they're all going the right way. So that's how you fix that. And you can see that we have all of our guides nicely organized on our brush. And we can even go back in here and make adjustments if we want this to be a little bit longer or something like that. Maybe we want to increase the length up to 1, and that looks a little bit better. Now let's go ahead and finish up 3D modeling our hairbrush. So I have this plane inside of here, and I'm going to select it, turn off the enable axis if you don't already have that off, so that we're just selecting the model and working with the model. And then we can create a duplicate of this actually, which can be pretty helpful. So I'm going to do Control-C, Control-V, that would be Command-V, Command-C on a Mac, and you'll see we get this duplicate in here. And if I hit the E hotkey, I can move this up and down and you can see it. I'm going to hit undo so it goes back into place. And now that we have that, I can go ahead and make these other, I can go ahead and make the original plane invisible. And I can just use that for the cloner. So I'm going to name this the dome of the brush for cloner. And then this one will just be the brush itself. So now this one that we're cloning along is invisible. But the nice thing about that is that then we can move up this so that we don't see those discs in there. And we can kind of 3D model around them. But you could also hide the disk from the render if you wanted to. If you go into render tags, display, you can decide that you want to make them invisible by turning on visibility and turning this to 0. The only problem with that is that it will also be affecting the hair. And we don't want that. So we need to also put this on the hair and make sure that the hair is set to 100% visibility, even if we're hiding the disc. So that's just something to keep in mind so that you can control that. And again, how you get to that is right-clicking, render tags, you'll see your display in here, and it helps you control your display and what it will look like. So now we have this brush hair, and we have our bristles pretty much in place. What we're going to need to do is go back into our edge mode, select that original edge selection we made, and we're going to 3D model off of this. So you can use something called the extrude, and you'll see that the extrude is listed out here. The hotkey for it is empty. If I click and drag, you'll see we are in fact making a new surface. And I can use the T hotkey in order to scale that out. And I can even smooth the edges a little bit. There's a tool within here. If you hold to click on the iron called Smooth Edges, you can click and drag, and that'll smooth out those edges in there just to make sure that that's looking smooth. And then we can use Extrude again. The hotkey for it is MT if you'd like to do it that way. And we can extrude this going this way. And if you want to flatten these out, you can scale them down to 0% holding shift, and you'll see that just flattens it out. You can also extrude by using the E hotkey, clicking on one of the arrows while holding Control or Command and moving it down. So that way you can extrude in a specific direction. I'm going to scale these in again, holding T and clicking and dragging within. And I'm going to do that again. Click and drag within. Now we have the central kind of hole we want to fill, and you can use that using the hotkey MD, which is polygon hole fill. So we're going to, it's called close polygon hole. So Command MD. If you use MD, you can go ahead and select here, and you'll see that it filled it, but it didn't make any edges. So my favorite way of doing this is changing it from basic polygon mode to grid, and I'll actually fill it in with a grid based on the edges you have around it. And you can see that it made everything quads, which I think is really nice. And maybe we want that surface to be flat so that we could put some kind of logo or initials of someone on it if it's their hairbrush. And that's looking good for that. Now we need a handle. So what we're going to do in order to build a handle is we're going to go into polygon mode with our brush selected. We're going to use our selection brush and just grab a few polygons here. Maybe we want to go up to this point, decide where you want to build your handle off of, and I'm just going to use Control while holding this arrow just to build that out. And you can make this however length you think would be good. That's looking good to me there. And now we're going to need some more loops going through here, so more edge loops. And you'll see what I mean by that. So we're going to use ML, and the hotkey, this hotkey, what it does is it opens up the loop path cut. So that will allow us to create a loop in here. And you'll see once I click one in there, I can actually increase them with these controls up here. So I can hit the plus button and we're just getting more of these loops. That's looking pretty snazzy, I must say so myself. My sister would laugh at me if she heard me using the word snazzy, but she's not here and I doubt she's watching my videos, so it's all good. And now we can go ahead and add in one of these here. Now we could add in a spherify in order to adjust its shape. We can use something called the bulge deformer, and I'll go ahead and click on that, and we can put this within the hierarchy of our brush. Okay, and right now the strength is at 0, but if I increase it, the strength, and also make sure that it's within, so you can see that the brush right now isn't within this bounding box. I'm going to turn off the sun and sky so that you can see that a little bit better. So we have this orange bounding box here. That's actually our bulge, and right now you can see that this deformer, our brush isn't within it. So we need to zero this out. So you can zero out the coordinates while it's within this polygonal mesh, and that'll center it to it. And the quicker way to do that, rather than typing in 0, 0, 0, is actually hitting reset transform. So right now I need to make sure that I have the right object selected, this deformer, and I'm going to hit reset transform, and you can see that that moved our deformer here. Now when I increase the strength, you can see we're actually deforming the brush itself. But we only want to really deform part of the handle. So what we need to do is we need to use the T hotkey, shrink this in, kind of small, and we're going to move this over to the handle because we're just shaping the handle. ever so slightly. And you can see that we're kind of affecting a lot in here. So we want to keep this within the box, and that'll keep the deformations within the box here, because we don't want to just be affecting everything. I'm going to scale this in a little bit more. And you can kind of shape this the way you'd like it to be. But you'll also see that there's additional controls for this. So you can adjust the size this way. So that's in the X. This next one is how much it's affecting it in the Y, and how much it's affecting it in the Z. And you can even rotate this around to see if that gets you the effect you want. I actually think that I'm going to rotate it this way. You can kind of see the shape of it. It's really bulging it out in that direction. So we need to adjust the size as well as the direction here. So we're going to do some of that. Adjust that to about 6, increase that, and then we can increase the strength here. And you'll see we get this nice curvature on the brush. I'm going to adjust this a little bit more. If you hold Alt, you can kind of move this in smaller increments, which can be helpful. And you can see you can make a pretty nice handle that way. I want to make sure that this is a little bit more centered, so I'm going to zero out the Y direction. And something else I'd like to do is add some bevels to this. So you'll see we have something called the bevel deformer in here. I'm going to put this right in here. And I'm going to increase the number of subdivisions. So you can see that what this is doing is it's adding bevels along here, little curvature along the edges, and you can increase the number of subdivisions. You can choose the radius right now of that bevel. So I can make it something pretty small, like 0.1, and you'll see that it just smooths out some areas in here. And you can adjust the angle threshold for at what point does it start smoothing out edges, so that the angle is the angle between the polygons. So if you had a straight line pointing out of each polygon, the angle between those is a certain number of degrees, and you're adjusting the angle threshold. At what point do we allow between these polygons to have a radius or a little bevel there? So you can see that's our brush. It's looking pretty nice. And something really quick that I just want to show you is that you can in fact texture this brush. If you go into your asset browser under Materials tab, you can go ahead and search for wood, and you'll find all kinds of cool Redshift materials in here for wood. If you hover over them and you see that Redshift symbol, that means, yes, this is a Redshift material. So maybe I like this one. Let's see what this is. This is interesting. I'm going to go ahead and put this on the brush. And then for the mapping, you can see I'm not so sure about the mapping there. Let's try some other options. If I click on the tag here, we can change it to cubic. And let's go ahead and move this texture. So you can actually move it by clicking on this texture mode, and then you can see the actual box for the texture. I'm going to hit T, and now I can scale that in because I have the texture itself selected. So I'm just going to put this here. We could go into more detailed texturing than this, but I think for our purpose now, just moving this along using T and using the box is all we need. Now, we do need to create a hair material, so I want to create a Redshift material, this principled hair material, and we're going to drag and drop this onto our hair. I'm going to turn back on our Redshift Sun and Sky, hit save, and we're just going to do a quick little render so that you can visualize the hair now. So you can see that it is in fact brown. I'm actually okay with the color it comes in kind of at default, but let's open up this material and talk about it briefly. So you can see that actually it's pulling a lot of attributes from this other tag over here. So we have this hair attributes tag being pulled into our principled hair. So that's referring to this tag over here that we were filling out. You'll see that we have a color, and you can select your color in here. You also have other options, like you can adjust your amount of melanin in the hair, or the amount of melanin redness. Maybe we can reduce that. And now it's looking a little bit more blonde. If you want an unrealistic hair color, you can really mess around with this albedo mix and use like bright pink or something if you're feeling that. I'm going to increase the melanin to a darker brown because this is a boar hairbrush, and I feel like that just makes sense. It's not super red. Maybe I'll reduce the redness a little bit. And you can adjust the variation if you'd like in here. You can adjust your, all just different kinds of settings, and you can really play around with those, and we can go in depth into that in the future if you're interested. But that's our hairbrush, and you'll notice that where the bristles come out of, we have this rubbery texture, and this is not looking rubbery, so let's go ahead and change that. So I'm going to turn off the IPR here for a moment so we can focus in on this, and I'll actually solo just our brush mesh in here. I'm going to go into polygon mode, and what I want to do is select these inner polygons. Actually, we already have these saved as a selection. So I can click on that, and now we have them selected. Can you see how helpful it is to save your selections earlier on so that you don't have to go back and click on every single little polygon to texture it later? So let's go find some cool rubbery textures in here. So let's change this from wood to rubber. We're looking up rubber. Okay, so we have all of these materials in here. Let's do this one. Wait, did I click on the... Nope, that's not Redshift material. Let's do this one over here. And then if you drag and drop your material to hair, magically, it'll apply the material to that selection. And we can make sure that we're using a cubic kind of mapping on this. And I'm going to go ahead and hit save. And close our asset browser. Now let's go ahead and render this again and turn off the solo. So now you can see we have a hairbrush. Now what I like to do once I finish 3D modeling something is just clean up the naming a little bit. And then I like to group everything that we needed for this model using Alt-G, and that drops it within this thing called a null object. And I'm going to call this brush final. And then I'm going to name this, I'm actually going to put this in another group, and I'm going to name this construction geometry. And I want to show you one more thing that you may find interesting. Let's open up this maple material. So you can see right now that this isn't having a smooth transition along those edges, which I'm not loving. So there are some options here of how we can fix that. The first one that I want to show you is this, and this will sometimes work and sometimes not work. So if we choose flat, and I'll turn off the IPR here for a moment and go back into our texture, you can see that now we have this panel, and we can rotate this around and use this as what we're texturing along. I think I might want to try another wood color. Let's try walnut. So if you want to replace an old material, you hold Alt over the and drag and drop it over the material you want to replace. And then it'll refresh. So now I want to rotate the material around. So I think that's looking a little bit better. And again, we could UV wrap this, but I think that this tutorial is mainly focused on the 3D modeling process, so I'm going to leave it here. But if you did want to take this to the next level, I would suggest trying to UV wrap it. And I have a whole other tutorial on UV wrapping that goes really in depth. And then really quickly, I'd just like to make some more minor adjustments to the brush. So I tend to go back and forth between 3D modeling, texturing, and all the methods, because sometimes when you step away from something for a minute, you look at it differently and you decide, you know what, I think this will look better. Like even for this brush here, it might be interesting to have a little bit more form language to this, where I bend this way and move it down. It has a little bit more of a shape to it, which I think is interesting, but I want to make sure that I'm selecting what I need. So that means I definitely need that edge and that edge. So I'm going to undo that move and make sure that I have everything selected that needs to be. And that everything is lining up just right. So I'll try that again, because I'd like a little bit more of a smooth transition. And actually another way you could do that is just by using the iron brush. So if we wanted to round out the side of the brush a little bit more, we could try that. I think that's looking better. I'm going to turn on the Redshift Sun and Sky, and we're going to start the IPR. So I do like that form language a little bit more. You can play around with it. And again, if you want to get really fancy with making this hairbrush, you could totally UV wrap it. So I think that's looking good. I'm going to play around with the textures, with the lighting a little bit more, and get this ready for rendering. If you would like to learn how to 3D model other objects inside of Cinema 4D, you can check out this playlist here called 3D Model with Me, where we 3D model various things together. If you'd like to learn more of the tools in depth and learn every single setting, I also have these other playlists where I cover every single tool inside of Cinema 4D, whether if it's a mesh tool or a generator or a deformer. You can find those there, and I'll see you here next time.